And the topic for today is Abnormal Psychology 1, which roughly touches upon abnormal behavior, the criteria of abnormal behavior. Then there are models of abnormality. There are several, about 3 to 4 models. And after that, there is an overview of ICD and DSM, especially the current versions that are ICD-11 and DSM-5-TR, or DSM-5 as we call it usually. Okay. So what is abnormal psychology is, it studies unusual patterns of three things that are very important in psychology and are interlinked to a great extent. This is the basis of all therapeutic intervention also. That is thoughts, feelings, that is emotions, and what we do, overt behavior. So thoughts, feelings, and behaviors, the unusual patterns in this, abnormal psychology deals with, and also psychological disorders, what their causes are, how to assess them, how to diagnose them, what language to use, that is classification, and the treatment, and how to go about it. So mainly the nature of abnormal behavior, what makes a behavior usual or unusual, causes or etiology. Sometimes this etiology, the spelling here, it's complex word. So when we spot it somewhere in the exam, do not freak out. This is just regarding the causes. What were the processes and the factors involved in the development of a disorder? And sometimes the spelling comes with an additional A, so that makes it AETIOLOGY. Be mindful of that. It's the same thing. So there are biological, psychological, and social origins that we'll be exploring later in the models of abnormality. There are classification systems. 2 main that we know of till now and that are widely used are DSM and ICD, but there are several others, 2 to 3 others, that we'll briefly touch upon also today. And lastly, there is assessment and treatment. How we diagnose and how we treat them. The key questions that we're looking at are, when and how does normal human behavior become abnormal, or how does normal human suffering become a psychological disorder? What does it look like? And then how to manage it effectively. One thing that is very central to all of our understanding of abnormal behavior and the entire abnormal psychology is that abnormality is not a standalone concept. It is dependent on the context, dependent on culture, dependent on time. And one more last thing is, there are no clear-cut divisions between abnormal and normal. So it is dependent on 3 things. You cannot really call it absolutely a robust concept that this, if somebody is doing, that is absolutely abnormal. Say context dependent, if I have to give you an example, say you are talking to yourself, you're looking at the ground, you're outside in public, walking quickly, looking at the ground, talking to yourself loudly. That might be considered abnormal. But if you are, so we have Rimita. Hi, Rimita, if I'm pronouncing that right. Good evening.
Yes, ma'am. Hello.
Okay. All right. So, so you're walking very fast and you are looking at the ground, talking to yourself. That might be considered abnormal. But if you're in your room, you're talking to yourself, or you are on a call, your earphones, you're talking to yourself loudly, or you're rehearsing a speech or a presentation, that would be normal, right? So the behavior standalone cannot be called normal or abnormal. Depends on the context, also depends on the culture, the kind of superstitions, the kind of rules we have in our culture might be considered abnormal in some other culture, and time sensitive. So for some time, say grief, when somebody passes away, a loved one passes away, the reaction after that, to some extent, it is justified. Say it goes on for like 6 months, say it goes on for 1 year. If it goes on for more than that, say 3 years, 4 years, becomes abnormal, becomes a prolonged grief disorder. Yeah. 3 things that mainly, roughly, abnormal psychology depends on to define abnormal behavior. Now, understanding normality, what exactly is normal and abnormal behavior? Now, it is not a single concept. It can be understood through 4 lenses mainly. And each of these has its own strengths and limitations also. One is statistical normality, which we use mainly in terms of IQ. Say we draw a bell curve, a normal probability curve, and people falling in this margin towards the center are normal. Ones falling on the extremes would be considered abnormal. But do we call them abnormal or do we call them rare? We call them rare. Rare. Therefore, that is one of the limitations of this concept of abnormality, that rare behavior is not always abnormal. Say high IQ people who have IQ above 120, 130, they are rare, but they cannot be called abnormal in the literal sense of the term, right? So anything that is not average cannot be abnormal. That is one drawback. Statistical normality, I hope we are clear. Next is social or cultural normality. So majority of the people, whatever they're doing is normal, and what the majority is not doing becomes abnormal. Right? What we were just discussing, how talking to oneself might be considered normal in one religious setting, in one contextual setting, but not in the other. Eye contact norms are also different. So in the Indian culture, for example, if you make too intense an eye contact with your elders or the authority, that is considered disrespectful or abnormal. You are expected to sort of break eye contact in between, lower your gaze, talk to them respectfully. But in the American culture, if you're not making eye contact and talking, that is considered a sign of low confidence. You see how the interpretations change with culture. That is what this concept of normality is all about. But however, these norms also change over time. The biggest example is homosexuality, which was once also a disorder in the DSM. But now, over time, as people realize that it is not a condition, it is a choice. It's just how people feel. So then, it was removed from the this thing from the classification. That is why the drawback is that these norms and these things change. They change over time, and you cannot really stay very fixated on these concepts. Next is, yeah, the ideal and functional normality. Ideal being, what is my idea of ideal functioning? What is healthy or normal? What is healthy and optimum for human functioning? Those standards we take to compare whether the behavior is normal or abnormal. This is mainly rooted in humanistic psychology, and there's this particular theory by Jehoda regarding criteria of ideal mental health, which are given below: self-awareness, emotional regulation, autonomy, and healthy relationships. So understanding our own emotions and motivations. Emotional regulation is managing our emotions and feelings effectively. Autonomy is taking our own decisions independently. And healthy relationships are having productive social and personal connections. So compared to these where I'm standing, if I'm too far away from the optimum, that might be considered abnormal. And if I am closer to it, might be considered normal. Right? Again, but these are also in a way distributed over a normal probability curve. Some people, there's no normality per se, but in a particular range in between, in the average section, is considered normal. Too much of something or too less of something is again considered abnormal. Would that be correct? No, because that can be considered rare, but not always abnormal. Lastly, daily role performance, functional normality. How well am I able to function in my daily life? Am I able to perform my roles? Am I able to hold meaningful relationships? And am I able to hold up my occupational commitments? Am I able to care for myself? This is not about feeling, this is about doing. So if you're not able to do, then it is considered abnormal, which is the main, largely clinical psychology follows this view of normality and abnormality. Okay. Next is the concept of abnormality. Mainly relies on mainly four criteria. The 4 Ds of abnormality are used to identify abnormality, which is deviance, distress, dysfunction, and danger. Now, not all four Ds are required to be able to call a behavior abnormal. Because, say, in antisocial personality, there is very little distress. In mania, for example, in the manic phase of bipolar disorder, there is very less distress, right? And danger, there might not be danger in all the disorders, yet they are still called disorders. Examples of how not all 4Ds are required to be met in all disorders. So there's distress, deviance, dysfunction, and danger. Deviance is violation of social norms, the social concept of normality that we just discussed, that is talking to unseen people in public, we discussed. Distress is subjective suffering. Does it pain you to be like this? That is distress. For example, severe anxiety, hopelessness. You're able to maintain functioning, but it's still paining you somewhere. Dysfunction, impairment in functioning, which is the functional concept of normality we just discussed. And danger is harm to self or others. So this could be suicidal or violent behavior, homicidal behavior, anything like that. If you have any doubts, feel free to put them in the chat box, just saying. I know we are not used to a lot of interaction in the classes, but I would appreciate any doubts if they come up right now or even later. I'd be happy to entertain them. Right. Additional criteria for abnormality. So what do we usually use in clinical settings? I'll quickly go over this. We have a lot to cover. Right. So there's unexpectedness. If the response is not in tandem with the situation was this much, we responded this much. Or situation was huge, but the person has no response at all. That could be considered abnormal. Extreme panic after a minor inconvenience, for example. Loss of control. Person cannot control themselves. They cannot regulate themselves, their thoughts, emotions, or behavior. For example, the compulsions that we talk about in OCD. They are almost compelled to perform the compulsions. Therefore, it falls under abnormality. Irrationality. Appears illogical. There is no logic. There is no sense in how they're behaving. For example, biggest example is delusions or disorganized behavior in schizophrenia, right? Observer discomfort. Seeing them makes us feel also very uncomfortable. Say they are performing these very rigid compulsions. They're like washing and washing and washing, and their hands are like, what do you call it? Their hands are damaged from washing so much. It brings us a lot of discomfort and distress to see them like that. Or disorganized behavior in schizophrenia. It could go to extremes in terms of schizophrenia. That could also be one of the things that clinicians consider to call a behavior abnormal. Defining abnormality is difficult because there is cultural relativity, historical changes, context also matters. We've discussed this, and the continuum model. That is one thing. Main thing here is anxiety. So mild worry is very adaptive. It is required in any situation. And it is very natural reaction to something. Say you have an exam tomorrow or you have a presentation tomorrow, you bound to worry. That will happen no matter how much you want to suppress it, to not have it. It will happen irrespective of the preparation. Little bit above that, it might interfere a little bit more with your functioning. Say some people, they lose appetite before presentations. One of those people is me. The last one is severe panic. See, a person is paralyzed. They're immobilized, rendered immobilized, or absolutely unable to function in the face of that anxiety. That becomes abnormal, or that becomes pathological, right? So it was a continuum. Little bit was okay. Little bit more than that was problematic, but still functioning. But too much was unbearable and pathological. Is the main continuum model is the main understanding of pathology, psychopathology. Moving on, what are the models of abnormality? I am thirsty. I don't know about you people, so I'm just going to take a quick water break before we dive into this. Okay, so we view several lenses to view abnormality, right? From there are several, 2 to 3 to 4 of them. One is the genetic biomedical model. One is psychodynamic, then there is behavioral, there is cognitive, and there is diathesis-stress model. 5 5 of them mainly. Keep account. First one, biomedical model. So the core assumption is that abnormal behavior comes from, one is brain dysfunction. Some part of the brain is not functioning properly, right? There are structural abnormalities, say structural or functional abnormality. From functional abnormality, what we mean is some neurotransmitter is not functioning right. Some synaptic communication is getting disturbed, right? By structural abnormality, we will come to it later also. Some structure has changed in some matter. Something has atrophied in the brain. By atrophy, I mean it has either grown larger or shrunk a little bit compared to the normal brain. So something of that sort has happened. Brain dysfunction mainly is the larger term we use. Neurochemical imbalance, or there is a genetic predisposition. It has come from genes only. Basic assumption of biomedical model is this: genes, hormones, structures, brain structures. One of these three is not working right. I mean, one of these three is not working right. Main thing is that mental disorders are just biological stuff. They are diseases of the brain. Something in the brain only is wrong. This is also called the biological model or medical model. Yeah. So first we come to genetics. Psychological disorders do tend to run in the families, mainly schizophrenia, bipolar, and OCD, mainly, but also other disorders, mood disorders, and anxiety disorders, and personality traits. I wouldn't say disorders, but traits. They do run in the family, right? And evidence has come from twin studies. So twins psychologists or psychological researchers are particularly interested in. They want to separate these twins. Twins that have been separated at birth, raised in different households, they have the same genetic information. How it manifests in response to the environment, or two people, adoption studies, two people who have been born in different, they have different genetic makeup, they are raised in a similar manner. These are things that are very important in establishing these genetic theories of disorders, in strengthening the biomedical model of disorders. Family studies, right? Family studies also say they draw a whole genogram of the entire family, and they see who had what, and whether or not it was passed on to the next generation, and why. So they study the entire families of people who have suffered psychopathology, mainly autism, bipolar, schizophrenia. Main research has been in these three disorders. The neurotransmitters that are mainly associated with the biomedical model or with brain dysfunction or with psychopathology are dopamine. Too much is schizophrenia, too less is Parkinson's. Sir, am I saying that right? He's not here. Okay, serotonin in depression, it goes less. Norepinephrine also implicated in anxiety and mood disorders. GABA, which is the main excitatory, and glutamate, which is the main inhibitory. This thing, the neurotransmitter, are also implicated in anxiety and schizophrenia disorders. Wait one second.
Ma'am.
Yeah.
Should we understand the dopamine and the associated disorders in the less or more in a way, or like a problem in the pathways, separate dopamine pathways, problems in that lead to difficult, like Parkinson's is related to nigrostriatal pathways, and schizophrenia is related to mesocortical pathways, and those
Right.
disruptions.
That goes one step ahead, and we will be covering that in when we have like separate syllabus, separate segment dedicated to specifically this schizophrenia and what all pathways are involved in that. So we will come to that, and I think it will be helpful to read, because more information never harms, right?
Yes, yes, ma'am.
We will cover that in case it shows up in the exams, but mainly just to sort of touch upon what all neurotransmitters are mainly involved in psychopathology. It's these, right?
Another thing is that isn't depression is also sort of related to dopamine because our nucleus accumbens and reward centers get are associated with dopamine. So depression is also kind of stems from there.
Yeah, you're very correct. So, in depression, the main hypothesis is the monoamine hypothesis, which is what I have touched upon for now. But when we come to depression, and we'll discuss what all causes it, we'll discuss in depth both the cognitive theories and what the biology involved is exactly. Yeah, we're just touching upon this topic for now.
Okay,
Just to
okay.
understand, okay, this is the model, and roughly these things are there inside it. Okay, I appreciate that you brought that up because yes, we will be coming to that, and it is important from an exam point of view.
Okay, yes, thank you.
All right. Next is brain structures. So in schizophrenia, mainly the problem is enlarged ventricles. There are a couple of other brain structures that are involved for schizophrenia. We'll come to that in when we discuss the disorder specifically, alag se. Then there's PTSD or depression. There is reduced hippocampal volume. In anxiety, amygdalal hyperactivity, and in ADHD, the executive dysfunction or the frontal lobe dysfunction. Roughly, right? These are things that are largely the components that are involved in brain structure function in biomedical model. All right, then neuroendocrine factors like HPA axis dysregulation. There is cortisol abnormalities. These are mainly two things that are involved in how these trigger off the immune response, how the immune response gets exhausted and then the body gets affected in other ways. These are also things that would come under the biomedical model. So roughly anything related to the body, right? Anything related to the brain, the nervous system, and how it is working over time or not working for us in a disorder. This is what biomedical model covers. Now, I want us to develop a basic understanding first that these models are not, they don't function in a way that this is the best, so this one is adopted and the rest are discarded. It works in a manner where a little bit of everything we need to understand in order to get a comprehensive view of a disorder. So this research in this goes on alternate and consecutively the research in other models also goes on, right? And we keep ourselves updated with all of these in order to enhance our understanding of each disorder. There's no definite outcome. Say if somebody asks you what causes schizophrenia, you cannot have one definite answer. Okay, this gene caused it. That's not how it works. Yes. Biological explanations of major mental disorders, mainly for schizophrenia, mainly what's asked is the dopamine hypothesis. If there's excess dopamine, it causes positive symptoms. We'll be studying the pathways a little bit later. Antipsychotics block dopamine, amphetamines worsen psychosis. And also there are enlarged ventricles, genetic loading. There are two main genes that are implicated in schizophrenia, you're aware. There is neuregulin and dysbindin. We'll see it later. And glutamate dysfunction. Then for bipolar disorder also, bipolar disorder shares strong genetic links with schizophrenia. Remember that much. So there's strong genetic heritability, dysregulation in monoamines, amines, and circadian rhythm abnormalities. Lithium is particularly implicated in bipolar disorder, lithium effectiveness, and high twin concordance. So if one twin has bipolar disorder, chances are the other twin would also have bipolar disorder. Monoamine hypothesis, deficiency of serotonin, norepinephrine, and dopamine. These three are all collectively called the monoamines, and these three are all deficient in depression. Findings are also reduced hippocampal volume, as we discussed, and increased cortisol, which is the stress hormone. So there's that was also a neurotransmitter that is involved in this. Then there is very quickly anxiety disorders. There is overactive amygdala, GABA is not working properly, so there's less inhibition. There's genetic predisposition. Anxiety disorders also have a genetic predisposition, less studied, but still there. OCD, there is hyperactivity in orbitofrontal cortex, which is a part of the prefrontal cortex, frontal lobe, basal ganglia, caudate nucleus, and serotonin is implicated. Personality disorders, traits are largely inherited. temperament, impulsivity, low antisocial personality. BPD has great researches in terms of personality disorder inheritance, genetic inheritance of personality disorder. Substance use may, of course, dopamine, which is mainly involved in the reward circuitry, that is main neurotransmitter that is implicated. Then the key areas are the ones that are involving the dopamine circuitry, which is nucleus accumbens and VTA, ventral tegmental area. What are the strengths of this model? It is scientific, it is measurable, there can be strong research on this, there can be objective research on this, and effective medication can be developed, so disorders can be helped directly. But the limitations are it is very reductionist. What is this biology is causing everything? It is not biology that is causing everything, right? It reduces complex behavior into very, very simple biology, very simple categories. And it ignores the psychosocial factors completely. And medicine is not always sufficient. You can take medication, sometimes it does not work also. It's not that you eat medication and it is, you take your medication and it just fixes everything in your biology. The main wiring that was a little bit moved is fixed now, everything is fine. That's not how it works. So that's one of the limitations of this disorder. That means that's not, biology is not all. Psychodynamic model. Of course, Freud. Mainly unconscious conflicts of the id, repressed impulses in the id, childhood experiences, early life relationships, and intrapsychic conflict, which is id, ego, superego के बीच में the conflict. Symptoms are symbolic expressions of unconscious conflict. Just quickly for me, just quickly tell me, do we need into Freud's model? Need to dive into Freud's model, or do we know? Do we know enough?
For me, it's okay. Others can tell.
Give me a thumbs up or a thumbs down very quickly if you can. All right, I'm not expecting much responses. I've been told to not expect much responses. All right, for defense mechanisms, we roughly know what defense mechanisms are there. There is repression, which is forgetting, motivated forgetting. There is suppression, which is, so repression is more subconscious. Suppression is more active. It is more, it is more conscious. Projection is attributing own feelings onto others. Denial is refusing reality. Regression is moving to a previous stage, acting like a kid. Rationalization, where which sound like logical excuses for any kind of behavior, and displacement is redirecting any kind of unwanted or unacceptable impulse. These all exist. All of these exist. There's also a classification between healthy and unhealthy defense mechanisms. However, any kind of defenses, normal people also employ these, all right. At some point, in some stage, they do employ these, but when these get very rigid, robust, and when they get excessive, like you're using them in all situations, that is when it becomes psychopathological. Right. So psychodynamic explanation of disorders is, in schizophrenia, there is regression to, remember this, get this, oral stage. In schizophrenia, there is regression to oral stage, and when there is regression to the anal stage, it becomes OCD. Remember that much. This is something that I have faced in my exams, in competitive exams, just trying to put that across, put emphasis on this. There is, in schizophrenia, there is withdrawal from reality, object relations, there were disturbed early relationships. There was a concept of schizophrenic mother in the 1990s or 1980s, I'm not sure. There was this concept of the schizophrenic mother that, when the mother behaves in a certain way, that causes the infant or the offspring to develop schizophrenia, contributes as a factor to the development of schizophrenia in the offspring. If the mother is emotionally cold, I think that was the concept as it was. But that was largely then denied later. It was not accepted very much. There are other theories of schizophrenia that we'll touch upon. There is family theories, and there is communication theories. We'll come to that. For bipolar disorder, mania is mainly seen as a defense under the underlying depressions and feelings of helplessness. So whenever you're asked what is the etiology of bipolar disorder, you mainly say biology, the biological model, and then there is this. It is a defense against the depressive feelings that one individual has. Then there is depression. In Freud's Mourning and Melancholia, he said it is the loss of real or symbolic figure of attachment. So you're attached to somebody, or attached to something, if that is lost, it causes depression. It is retroflex anger. So basically, the anger you have towards something or somebody is turned inwards and it turns into depression. There's self-criticism, okay, and which leads to self-criticism, right? Then there is anxiety. It arises from unconscious conflict. Classic. There is this is intrapsychic conflict that is giving us this anxiety. There is ego anxiety. We've read in this model. Threatening impulses are trying to come to the surface, so that is causing the ego a lot of anxiety. How to suppress it, how to help it. And weak ego defenses. If the defenses are too weak, or if they are too strong, they're too robust, they're too rigid, it causes anxiety. There is OCD, in which there is regression to the anal stage, fixation in the anal stage, or regression to the anal stage. Super ego is very, very harsh. Now, isolation is a defense mechanism that is discussed with reference to OCD, but it is not really explained with the classic defense mechanism list. What isolation means is there is a distressing situation, say low score on a test paper, and there is the distress attached to it. This is the fact, this is the feeling that I have. What I do is, in isolation, these are linked for me right now. This is causing me the distress. The situation is causing me the distress. In isolation, they get detached. So this becomes absolutely harmless, no threat from this situation at all. But this free floating affect then attaches itself to a very neutral object, say washing hands, or this obsession with dirt, with this obsession with symmetry, and it attaches it to that object, and then that object creates a lot of anxiety in the individual. That is what isolation as a defense mechanism is in OCD. And then there's undoing. Undoing in the sense, if something is done, I can undo it. I can undo it. I can undo it by doing something. So compulsion is essentially an attempt to undo something, cancel something out, cancel something unacceptable out. Yeah. Personality disorders. There are early attachment disturbances, there is attachment issues, there is unresolved developmental conflicts, particularly for BPD. We will read that there is a very rich theory by Marsha Linehan, which is the biosocial theory of borderline personality disorder, this fear of abandonment and unstable object relations, splitting. We will read that in detail in when we come to personality disorders. Now, the strengths of this psychodynamic explanation are childhood experiences are emphasized. You can draw a comprehensive profile for a person. Unconscious processes are recognized, and their influence is deeply, in psychotherapy, their influence is deeply recognized, and it can be corrected, it can be explored, a lot of exploration can be done. But the limitations, yes, Ramita.
Ma'am, about the OCD, I was thinking that the isolation as a defense is the obsessive part. So I am taking my anxiety and isolating itself into something, say dirt, like feeling dirty all the time, and the undoing defense will be the compulsion. So because of I'm feeling dirty, I'm obsessed over that fact. So I'm constantly washing my hands. Am I
Yes.
right?
Yes, correct.
Okay. Thank you.
So, no, I'll tell you what. Undoing is different. Undoing is when I have an unacceptable impulse in my mind. Say I have this impulse to slap my partner, right? To undo that impulse, now it has come in my mind. I want to undo it. So I'll do something, and then this thing will go from my mind. That is the assumption. That is the defense. Something that I do will erase what I am thinking or feeling. Clear?
Oh, okay.
Right? Say an isolation is basically anything, some other stressor apart from the object of obsession. I'm stressed about that, I am anxious about that, and from that I completely detach my affect and I attach it to something neutral, say dirt, right? So there is some other stressor as conceptualized by Freud, there is some other stressor that I'm stressing about, I would detach the stress from it. I would put it on something very harmless, which is dirty, or say this repeating something, say leaving the door knob, the latch open, or leaving the gas stove on. Things like these. I'll attach it to these very neutral things, and then that becomes a source of anxiety for me. Yeah,
Understood.
that is this more in terms of etiology. Right. Okay. Now, moving on to the limitations, as is the case with any other, in general, psychodynamic school of thought, it is difficult to test scientifically. Very less testable stuff is given by the psychodynamic school. The interpretation is very subjective, and empirical evidence is very limited because testability is limited. All right. Moving on. Next is the behavioral model. The core assumption is again that all abnormal behavior is learned. In classical conditioning, it is learned through association. Say, I am bitten by a dog, and then I go on to develop cynophobia, which is the fear, intense phobia of dogs. So that becomes there is a pairing of a neutral stimulus with something, a painful experience. So that stimulus is then constantly feared by me. Operant conditioning, where the behavior is maintained through reinforcement. I'm getting something out of it, or I'm not, I'm punished upon doing something, so I either do or don't do it. For example, in ASD, especially in neurodevelopmental disorders, when we, in the treatment part, when we take up a behavioral perspective, we try to view every behavior in terms of what is it getting for the child, what is the child getting out of this behavior. So what is the instrumentality of what they're doing, right? The operant conditioning is mainly that school of thought. Observational learning, I learn by watching others. So what other people do, how, and upon doing that, what they are getting, that is what I will also end up learning and doing. Sometimes I learn maladaptive patterns, and that goes on to become psychopathology. Okay. Right. So the behavioral explanation of disorders is in schizophrenia, abnormal behaviors are reinforced by family responses and social consequences. And and also it is believed that institutional, if these people are institutionalized, they will never be independent. In bipolar disorder, manic behaviors are, they get a lot of attention, they get a lot of social attention, and social gets them achievement, it gets them rewards, so it is then maintained or reinforced that way. And for depression, we have Lonson's theory that depression results from low positive reinforcement and reduced rewarding experiences in life. So there are less positive experiences in life, that makes it that triggers depression and maintains it both. For anxiety and OCD, mainly for OCD, Morrow's two-factor theory is that, again, as we said, that classical conditioning, it is learned, there is paired association with a particular object of obsession. Once it is associated, avoidance maintains it. It gives you um, it gives you avoidance gives you positive reinforcement. I think my brain is not able to process it right now. I'll be making notes from next session onwards. But compulsions give you negative also give you negative reinforcement, like you do it and then you get out of that situation. Avoidance will give you positive reinforcement. You don't have to face it after all. You don't face the anxiety provoking stimulus. You don't have anxiety, you don't do compulsions, yay, progress, false progress, that is. So we learn via classical conditioning and we maintain via operant conditioning. Behavioral therapies largely use this principle in this understanding to treat the same. The strength is that it is very scientific and testable, and effective therapies can be developed from it, which can be very systematized, manualized treatments. The limitation is that, again, it ignores internal mental states, and biology is also underestimated. Any perspective we take, it is going to ignore other perspectives, and that becomes a drawback. Cognitive model, mainly maladaptive thoughts. Maladaptive thoughts, and CBT, this is a CBT term, cognitive distortions, is a thought that is not completely accurate or logical. Yeah, that is a cognitive distortion. Don't worry about the word. So it results from maladaptive thoughts, cognitive distortions, and dysfunctional beliefs. Dysfunctional beliefs is an REBT term. Main contributors were Beck and Ellis. Thoughts influence emotions and behavior. So mainly we work with the thought part of the thought, emotion, behavior triad. Correct? This was mainly this is mainly cognitive model is particularly effective in understanding depression. How? Again, Beck and Seligman. So in the Beck's cognitive triad was self, world, and future. Negative beliefs about all three of these would cause us to have developed depression. Negative beliefs about self are worthlessness. Negative beliefs about others are helplessness. Negative beliefs about the world as in others as in world, and negative beliefs about the future is hopelessness. This is the cognitive triad of depression. There are several cognitive distortions involved. We'll come to that when we study CBT. Then there is an example of this, how negative view about self is I am worthless. Negative view about our world is everything is against me, everyone is against me. And regarding the future, that nothing will improve. This is the cognitive triad, example of the cognitive triad. Moving on. Cognitive explanations of several disorders in schizophrenia. There's disturbance in attention, information processing, and attribution styles. Delusions are mainly faulty interpretations of events. So in CBT, we do a lot of evidence examination. We take up a situation, we take up a thought, we see where it came from, and we see how else it could have been seen. That is reframing, but before that comes collecting evidence for this particular thought that we have currently. So for delusion also, the approach that we take is taking that delusion and listing the points for and against it. Correct? So we that is how we come to treat these delusions. Therefore, the idea is that delusions are only faulty interpretations. Event is the same. You interpret it in a certain illogical way. Bipolar disorder. Depression phase is again linked to negative schemas, and mania is linked to grandiose beliefs and unrealistic optimism in response to the depressive phase again. For depression, we've already read that there is negative automatic thoughts. We'll read about this whole schema, intermediate thoughts, and negative automatic thoughts thing in CBT. We'll read about it properly, but for now, these negative thoughts produce depression. There's also Seligman's learned helplessness, that there's a perceived lack of control over the future, so the person absolutely gives up attempt to deal with the situation. Absolute helplessness they display. There is anxiety, that is overestimation of threat. Combined threat is overestimated, our ability to cope with it is underestimated. Both work simultaneously. Okay. Then there is personality disorder, OCD. Obsessions are misinterpretations of intrusive thoughts, or giving too much attribution, giving too much importance, laying too much emphasis on these thoughts that occur to everybody. Obsessive compulsive disorder, people just take it and they don't let this thought go, right? That is what the perception of OCD is from a cognitive lens. And it is also misinterpretation, this belief. There's this particular cognitive distortion that is involved in this. It's called thought action fusion, TAF, thought action fusion. We'll read more about it, in depth about it, when we read about OCD. And an inflated sense of responsibility, like a person feels like they can control everything, and it is upon them to control everything. There's also intolerance of ambiguity. Ambiguity about the future or uncertainty about the future becomes too overwhelming, and the person cannot take it, so they want to control the future. That's also there. Then there is substance use. It is maintained by expectancies. What am I going to get out of it? I'm going to get something very nice out of it. Cognitive justification. Oh, it's fine. It's just one cigarette. It's just one so-and-so substance. And craving related thoughts that, I will not be able to, I feel helpless in the face of my cravings. I cannot control my cravings. Thoughts like these. We'll discuss that also when we come to it. Strengths is, of course, CBT, strong empirical support, highly effective therapies, It is very structured, very practical. But the limitation is the unconscious processes are ignored and thoughts may be consequences and not the cause of things. So these thoughts might be resulting in response to something as opposed to them being the cause of it. So they come after, not before. That is suspected, but of course it cannot be proved. It is the chicken and the hen paradox. Okay, the diathesis-stress model lastly. So what it says is that psychological disorders develop due to, there is a diathesis, which is the vulnerability, and then there is environmental stress. Neither can produce psychopathology alone. It comes as an interaction of both. So that for diathesis, we have genetic predisposition. There are biological factors. There are also psychological factors that can act as diathesis. Then there are temperamental factors, which again comes under psychological factors only. Then the environmental triggers, the stress part. There could be trauma, there could be loss, grief, bereavement. There could be academic stress or other situational stress, say a major life transition, or there could be conflict in the family or immediate social support could be missing. That is all that these are all things that could act as stress or environmental triggers. Right. Now coming to diathesis-stress explanations of disorders. In schizophrenia, as we were discussing, the genetic vulnerability comes from two main genes have been implicated in researches studying schizophrenia. One is neuroregulin, other is dysbinding. Stress triggers that are identified, that are currently identified are cannabis use, urban stress, family conflict. There is also, while there's urban stress, there is also this poverty or deprivation. These are also identified as there are theories that say schizophrenia is caused by in the less developed cities more than others. So that then there's bipolar disorder. There are genetic genes that are implicated in this. There is CATNAO1C, there is ankyrin, and there is COMT, catechol O methyl transferase. Basically, you don't have to know the full form; they won't ask you that. But just know that if something along the lines of these genes pops up, you know what to do with. There's CATNAO1C, there's ankyrin, there's ankyrin 3, there is COMT. COMT is also seen in OCD. It is also implicated in OCD. Stress triggers could be sleep deprivation, stressful life events. It could be by sleep deprivation, what they mean is circadian rhythm imbalance, right? With depression, there is the vulnerability is negative cognitive style or a family history or a genetic loading of depression. Stress could be loss, any stress for depression. The stress could be anything, any perceived trigger. Anxiety disorders also, behavioral inhibition as a trait is particularly important. And the stress is trauma or chronic stress exposure or a lack of coping strategies, particularly is a it's a vulnerability and as well as a stress trigger. For personality disorders, so for OCD, there is genetic neurobiological predisposition, there is COMT, and there is SLC6A4, which is particularly studied in relation to OCD. These are particular genes that are found in individuals that are modifications in these genes are found in individuals that have the disorder. And for the stress, there are stressful life. It could be anything. Could be anything. There's no particular stress trigger for OCD. Personality disorders, temperament, insecure attachment, as we have discussed previously. Then there is invalidating or traumatic environment, as we will read later. When we come to personality disorders, last is substance use. Impulsivity is a major vulnerability in terms of substance use. And then there's also genetic risk. There's genetic risk. So the percentage or the genes involved are not particular. They're studied for different substances separately. But largely, we need to know that there is a genetic risk. Stress is peer pressure or emotional distress. Yeah. Protective factors, and what are some protective factors? We've read the stress factors. Now we need to read also about the protective factors. Our social support, it buffers stress. There are coping skills, adaptive coping mechanisms mainly. could be active coping, could be positive reframing, could be religion is one of those, could be instrumental support, emotional support. These are all adaptive coping mechanisms. What are some maladaptive coping mechanisms? They could be self-blame, behavioral disengagement. It could also be substance use is one of those, venting. These are examples of maladaptive coping mechanisms. So secure attachment, which leads to emotional regulation, the ability to be able to regulate one's emotions, that is a protective factor. Then there is resilience, or ability to better adapt to situations or stressors, that also becomes a protective factor. What are the strengths of this model? It is integrative, it combines both biology and environment. It explains individual differences, and there is strong research support also across disorders. Come to think of it, it's quite an integrative approach. Like, it's integrated both um, nature and nurture. But how do you exactly measure which one mattered more, or how do you exactly measure what interacted in what all interacted in what way and caused the psychopathology? That it becomes a limitation of this disorder. Moving on to classification, I would need a 1 minute break. Please allow me that. I would request all of us to take a 1 minute break, please. All right. There is. It's gonna take about a lot of time to cover this, more than the sanctioned time. So I would be wrapping up here for now. But from the next, in the next class, and whenever we meet, we're going to be starting with classifications in abnormal psychology. So we'll be talking about the approaches to classification of disorders, and why that is done, and major classificatory systems, differences between them, and a lot of other details that are particularly significant to the field of clinical psychology. This also is one of our bread and butter topics. So we will give it more time, give it more detail, and Yeah, we'll start from here next time. All right, I think I am done for this. Yes, I finally moved out the presentation, thank God. Okay, I am done from my side. Is there any? There are two people in the presentation currently, in the meet currently. There is Meenakshi and Ramita. Any doubts from your end? Anything you want to ask me or tell me? I'm open to that.